are homeless people lazy? And I guess the thought behind this is that if they weren't lazy, they would get a job like the people who have a job. And um, again, it's a case by case basis, and in any dynamic, in order for something to occur, we have to have a culture that allows and creates homelessness. And a homeless person has to fit some way inside that niche. It's a little bit like musical chairs. So there's a few 100,000 people in Marin. I think that's the number. And so out of every 200 people, one of them is homeless. Now, that means if we're playing a game of musical chairs, and you gather people, and you gather 200 chairs together, and you've got 200 people, you take away one of the chairs, and one of those people is going to be homeless. And the question is, who's it going to be? So 200 people, 199 chairs, who's going to be the homeless person? Now, the culture is responsible for there only being 199 chairs. And our culture produces a certain amount of unemployment. And the question is just, who's it going to be? That's part of the capitalist framework. Who's it going to be? It produces a certain amount of homelessness. And the question is, who's it going to be? Well, typically, it's going to be the person who can compete for a home and for a job less than anyone else. And who's that going to be? Well, typically, it's going to be someone who has a poorer background rather than a wealthier background, who has mental emotional health crises more than someone else, who doesn't fit in to the status quo quite as easily. So it's going to be someone who's different than the majority in some way. Now, difference doesn't necessarily mean worse, but it does create a competitive disadvantage when the culture does not accommodate that difference. For example, if we did not do anything to create wheelchair ramps over the last 50 years ago, and we've made it a law that we have to accommodate our disabled people. But let's just say we didn't do anything. And we have a race. Well, obviously, the person with the wheelchair is going to lose the race. Everyone runs up some steps, and the wheelchair can't get up steps. The person with the wheelchair will come in last. So our disabled are more likely to end up in the unemployed, homeless category than anyone else. So our disabled are going to be targeted as the least likely one to find a chair when the music stops. And who's going to win? Well, the most assertive, dominant, alpha, competent people. And who are those? In many cases, there's a correlation between education, between wealth. There's a correlation in race. So currently, white, wealthy women are at the top, and meaning in terms of school grades and moving, and having, more options, etc. White, wealthy, women are at the top in a number of areas, and white, wealthy men are second to in some categories and ahead in other categories. It's Jordan Peterson's doing some good work to actually break that down. Because there's some areas where men dominate and there's some areas that women dominate, and our culture values mass production more than it values healthcare, and there's more women in healthcare, and so there's a small percentage of men that are, working, 60 to 100-hour weeks in scalable industries that make a ton of money and that don't have much of a life. And then there's other industries like garbage collectors. They're mostly men. Oil riggers, mostly men. So there's a number of male-dominated industry, and danger tends to pay well. But someone who's more sensitive and artistic is not going to do well in any of those positions. And there's not a lot of place in the culture that we've curated for, a very wide spectrum of people. Sensitives in particular tend to have a difficult time in the United States. So it's not usually laziness per se. There's sensitivity, there's disadvantaged backgrounds. Disadvantaged backgrounds often compound. Someone who's had a lot of traumatic abuse in childhood is going to be less assertive, because you learn in childhood abuse that when you protect yourself, the punishment increases. And when you're 2 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, you feel completely helpless, one, but you are. Meaning, you say, stop hitting me, stop hurting me, and you get hurt some more. What you learn is to be reticent and to be silent. And one of the traits that correlates to accomplishment and wealth is disagreeableness and assertiveness. Well, when we treat a certain demographic of our young people, when we teach them that to survive, they have to repress assertiveness and disagreeableness, and then we spit them out into the workplace, and the most disagreeable and assertive people are the ones that progress according to the data, then, we have set up our most abused children to fail. So they're more likely to be, so when we have that scenario of 199 chairs and 200 people, they're more likely to be the last to sit down, and lo and behold, there's no chair.